You can also apply gradient to the stroke of an object. Unlike with a gradient applied to the fill of an object, you cannot use the gradient tool to edit a gradient for a stroke. However, a gradient on a stroke has more options available in the gradient panel than does a gradient fill. Next, you'll add colors to a stroke to give wheels on a bike a funky look. Funky, funky. So go down here, we're going to choose 3 bike from the artboard navigation menu. With the selection tool, click one of the wheels. The wheel is actually a path with a stroke. There. Took me a second. Alright, click the stroke box at the bottom of the toolbar on the left. Click the gradient. I did click stroke, didn't I? There, stroke. Click the gradient box below the stroke box in the toolbar. Gradient is right there. And what that does is that applies the last used gradient for this current session that we're working on. For a gradient applied to a stroke, you can choose different alignments on the stroke, within, along, or across. In this section, you'll explore how to align a gradient to the stroke and edit the gradient's colors. In the gradient panel, set the following. If yours is still open, great. If it's not, you can go to Window and select Gradient there. Ensure that the stroke box is selected. It's on top when it's selected like this. So you can edit the gradient applied to the stroke. Leave type as linear gradient. You can, if you hover your mouse, you can see that it's a linear gradient. Click the Apply Gradient Across Stroke button. That's within, that's along, and that's across. So click the third one. Click the Reverse Gradient button. So the reverse gradient, the darkest color is on the left side of the gradient. You see it flip these right here. With this type of path, aligning the gradient across the stroke can give the path a three-dimensional appearance. Now to change the colors in the gradient, double click the middle blue color stop. So double click that one. And with the swatches option selected, select the swatch named magenta. Magenta. Purple, magenta. There's your magenta one. Select that one. Double click the green color stop on the right end of the bar. And select the swatched name light blue. Light blue to select that and apply it. In the gradient panel, click the middle magenta color stop, the one we just did, and choose 50% from the, hang on, don't double click it like I did, just click it. And on the location, we're going to change that to 50%. So opacity is 100, location is 50%. The color stop is now 50% between the end and beginning of the annotator. You could have also dragged the color stop to change the location value. Next, you'll add a new color to the gradient to experiment a little. In the gradient panel, move the pointer below the gradient slider between the two color stops. When the pointer with the plus sign appears, click to add another color stop. And so you see right here how my pointer, when you get the plus, click right there, and that's going to add another color stop. Double click that new color stop and select any other color. So I'm going to select indigo. That's what I'm selecting. Select whatever color you want. All right, press the escape key to hide the swatches and return to the gradient panel. When experimenting, sometimes you want fewer colors rather than more colors. Next, you'll remove the color you just added. Don't you love it when we add something and then get rid of it? So drag the color stop that you just added down and away from the gradient slider. When you see that it's gone from the slider, release the mouse button to remove it. So I'm just going to simply click that, drag it down here, and it's gone. So I wound up setting the stroke option in the gradient panel to apply gradient within stroke because it looked better to me. I didn't do that. That's my book. So if you want to apply gradient within stroke like that, you can. If you want to change it to that one, you can. If you want to change it to that one, whatever makes you happy. So there are two wheels on the bike. Why don't you practice by applying the gradient to another black wheel shape to the right? Select the other wheel and start from the beginning of this section to apply the last used gradient to it. So go ahead and do that. You can see that I've done that. So all I did was I selected that wheel and I went over here and selected the last used gradient and applied it, and so they both have the same gradient applied, although one of them, this one, doesn't have it applied to that. I'm going to make them look the same there. It applied the same gradient, but I didn't have the stroke in the same. So now mine are the same. If yours aren't the same, that's fine. I just wanted mine the same. All right, with the radial gradient, the starting color is the center of the fill. The color radiates outward to another color. Radial gradients are useful for giving elliptical shapes, a circular type of gradient. Next, you'll sample a gradient to fill another shape that is part of the rolling hills in the scene. Choose one presentation from the artboard navigation menu. With the selection tool selected, click this pink hill shape. Select the eyedropper tool over here. Click the rolling hill shape you adjusted the gradient earlier. The same gradient is applied to the shape. We want the gradient to follow the contour of the hill, which would require the gradient to be an elliptical gradient. Next, you'll turn the gradient into an elliptical gradient. In the gradient panel, ensure that the fill is selected. So it was on stroke, so select the fill. Click the radial gradient button to convert the linear to a radial. So we simply click right there on radial and it converts it. Just that simple. It's a great time to click File and Save in case something happens. So now we're going to edit your colors in the radial gradient. Previously in this lesson, you edited gradient colors in the gradient panel. You can also edit the colors directly on artwork with the gradient tool, which is what you'll do next. Select the gradient tool in the toolbar. So let's go over here and find the gradient tool. It's probably right there. There's your gradient tool. In the gradient panel, with the shape still selected, click the reverse gradient button to swap the gradient colors. To zoom into the shape, you can press Control plus on a Mac or Command plus or Control plus on a Windows. Notice that the gradient annotator starts from the center of the shape and points to the right. If you move the pointer over the annotator, a dashed circle around it indicates that it's a radial gradient. See how that's dashed around that? When you move it to it, it's dashed around the circle. So you can set in additional options for radial gradients, as you will soon see. So move the pointer over the gradient annotator in the shape and double click the lighter green color stop on the right end, so double click this lighter green one to edit that color. In the panel that appears, click the swatches button if it's not already selected, and then select the swatched name purple, that one right there. Press escape to hide the swatches panel. Next, you'll adjust the size, aspect ratio, and radius of the radial gradient so it follows the contour of the shape better. With the gradient tool selected on the toolbar, still selected, and the shape still selected, move the pointer toward the bottom center of the shape. Drag up to the top of the shape to change the gradient. Look at there. Move the pointer over the gradient annotator on the artwork so you can see the dashed ring around the gradient. You can rotate this ring to change the angle of the radial gradient. The black point on the ring is for changing the shape of the ring, called aspect ratio, and the double circle point is for changing the size of the gradient. Move the pointer over the black circle on the left side of the dashed line or ring. When the pointer changes to that little circle, see how it's got a little circle on it now? Drag to make the gradient wider. Drag it so it follows the shape. Alright, the gradient panel, you just change the aspect ratio by dragging the black circle. The aspect ratio changes a radial gradient into an elliptical gradient and makes the gradient better matched for the shape of the artwork. You can see that it's now, before it was just a circle, and now it kind of follows the artwork. Move the pointer over the double circle to see the, let's move it over this right here. And when the pointer changes, you see how it changed to this right there. Make the gradient larger or smaller, whichever looks best to you. So I'm going to drag mine in a little smaller. You see how it's changing on your screen. Mine's a little cattywampus. I guess it don't matter. We'll leave it like that. So get yours looking like you want it. Leave the gradient panel open. Choose select, deselect, file, save. So everybody's is going to look a little different. We've applied a gradient to this hill, this curve shape. You should have a gradient on there that goes along there with that radial gradient. And this would be a good time to stop this recording.